continue. Carlos.
Hi, Peter. Hi, Nicholas. So, for those listening, I'm Innovation Research Professor at the State University of New York in Binghamton, and I've been interested in complex systems for a long time. And I know Peter's work already for a long time. We collaborated on a project on cybernetics some years ago. And Nicholas, I didn't know until now, but both of you have very interesting books with the same title, Feedback. So we thought it would be interesting to speak about similarities and differences because, of course, they have the same title, but they're one could say very different books. So I don't know if you would like to introduce yourself, Peter.
Yeah, so first, I'm Peter Érdi, grew up in Budapest, Hungary, still have a wonderful Hungarian accent, and I'm serving as a Henry Luce Professor of Complex System Studies at Kalamazoo, Michigan. Kalamazoo is a very nice little city halfway between Detroit and Chicago, and it happened that we have a small-scale complex system center. And still, I have my professional and family connections in Budapest, including my two grandchildren. And so we are few weeks from now, we go back to Budapest to spend the whole summer as usually. And I learned, technically, I was a chemistry major, then I learned, but probably you don't have chemical cybernetics, whatever it means. And word on my main research field was maybe computational neuroscience for a longer period. And in the last several years, I'm writing books. There was the ranking book and the repair and all the feedback. And, uh, and I'm very glad that I saw Nick book. So we correspond. And Nick, the word is yours.
Yep.
Yeah, well, hello, both of you. My name's Nick Golledge, and I'm a professor of glaciology in Wellington, New Zealand. So my background's probably quite different to both of yours, really. I've come into the world of complexity science through the lens of Earth system interactions. Most of my work involves running computer models of how the Antarctic ice sheet works. And part of that kind of involves understanding how the ice sheet interacts with other components like the atmosphere and the ocean. And then, of course, there are the downstream impacts of, when the ice melts, it impacts sea level, which impacts societies. And then we have all sorts of related impacts, like how that makes individuals feel and how it triggers individual responses and actions. So over the years, I've sort of got more and more interested in not just the sort of feedbacks and the sort of complexity inherent in the natural world, but how that also connects to what we would think of as the sort of social or individual world as well. So that sort of human environment interaction side of things. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting area to be working, and I'm still learning a lot. So it's great to talk to both of you about this.
Yeah. So, I mean, you will correct me, but it seems to me that Peter's book is more about how the concept of feedback evolved historically from ancient times through cybernetics until modernity, and Nick's book is more about how evolution of complexity can be explained using concept of feedback. And oh, I wanted to start asking about the motivations for writing your books. Perhaps now, Nick, you can start.
Yeah, sure. No, I think your summary is quite right. And when I was reflecting on how our books differ, it was very much along those sort of lines that you've outlined there, Carlos. I kind of feel like Peter's done a great job of introducing the history and development of the ideas of feedbacks and the concepts and the physical principles, and then illustrated that with lots of examples. Whereas my approach has been kind of the other way around, in a sense, sort of looking at the natural world, looking at the social world, and then trying to understand that by looking for the feedbacks. So it sort of reflects the way that I came into this, which was very much from that sort of physical observational background and through numerical model experimentation and so on. And so in many ways, I was kind of, could go back probably 10 years or more to when I first started running computer models for the Antarctic ice sheet that incorporated feedback systems with the ocean and the atmosphere. And we started seeing very, very different behaviors when we started running these sort of coupled models rather than just running one model in isolation. And that sort of set me down this path of being interested in complex systems and the way that actually interactions between components can end up being pretty much the dominant driving force in how that system evolves, rather than maybe the more deterministic forcings that can go into these kind of models. So then I kind of got excited about all these ideas around self-organization and synchronization within many body systems. And as I was trying to apply these ideas to the physical world that I was studying, I found that actually there wasn't really much information out there. People hadn't really used this sort of approach to understand ice sheets. People think of ice sheets as being kind of fairly slow-moving and immobile things, and why would they be part of a heavily interactive system? But it turns out that they are an active part of the coupled complex climate system. So I started sort of diving into a lot of the literature, more in the ecological space, really. I found that there was a lot more research in population ecology, for example, using predator-prey type models to understand how feedbacks between systems could find balance overall or drive a system to collapse. And when I started exploring that, I then found that there were lots of other related fields that also found similar sorts of behaviors. And as my reading grew, it became very clear that I couldn't just write a paper about this stuff. It was going to have to be somewhat larger. And so the idea was presented to me that I should write a book. And of course, I laughed at the idea to start with, and then the seed was sown. So after several months of thinking about it, I thought, actually, I've got lots of different things to write about. So yeah, that's kind of where it came from my perspective.
Great.
To make this broadcast more lively, I have to admit that my cursor just frozen. And I'm not totally sure what will happen. I'm not able to make pause. So we might decide there are two options. We continue this with the hope that I'm making the record. Today, why don't you come, my wife?
It is.
Or
it is recording.
how?
It is recording. It shows in my
I
screen.
believe it's recording. I don't know how I will be able to stop.
No, it's when everybody leaves, it stops.
Recording. Also, I'm not able to see. Of course, I made some notes, and I'm not able to make any to see what is the problem. So, but I am an old folk, so probably I will be able to survive without seeing my notes, and I will leave this discussion here. So let's try to continue. The other possibilities, if I would drive 10 minutes to my office and would sit down here. And so that is just an interplay, and you see that is recording. So hopefully
Yes.
it will work. No, I'm fully back to discuss it, but this is part of the feedback problems. When your cursor doesn't work and you are not able to control what you are doing. There is some local internet problem, and probably it is its consequence. We had a tornado a few days ago, and everything, and the internet was down. So let's back to your question. I think that the question was, what was the motivation to write the book?
Mhm.
And so I had two different motivations to write this book. Number one, the book was based on the assumption or hypothesis or belief that there is a narrow border between destruction and prosperity. So some people say, as Steve Pinker, the rock star of the cognitive science, that is the possible best world and everything just much better than it was 100 years ago or so. And it is true. And other possibilities that, look, you don't see that we are very close to an extinction and humanity will disappear. And probably both perspective has right. And to ensure reasonable growth but avoid existential risk, we need to find a fine-tuned balance between positive and negative feedback. And of course, my attempt is not to deal with the impossible task to prove, certainly not in the spirit of the formal feedback control theory, but still I believe that a balanced feedback and balance between feedback, negative and positive feedback is necessary to keep the trajectory on the positive side of the transition. The second motivation is personal. My love for what is called cybernetics, which is more or less disappeared or a dirty word in the States. And as it happens in love, and we are not always rationalize our feelings. And Norbert Wiener created the modern field of cybernetics. And Carlos from Mexico, so I'm sure he's close to Rosenbluth spirit.
Yes. Yes.
And they wrote this incredible paper in 1943, which was the founding paper of cybernetics. So Wiener cybernetics, control and communication in the animal and machines, that was a pluralistic theory and an interdisciplinary movement of several leading intellectuals. So the term cybernetics itself goes back to the Greeks. Plato explained the principles of political self-governance. And so feedback is a fundamental concept of cybernetics process whereby some proportion of the output signal of a system is passed to the input. System itself contains a loop, and feedback mechanisms fundamentally influence the dynamic behavior of the systems. Roughly speaking, what everybody knows, negative feedback reduces the deviation of the error from a goal state, so it has a stabilizing effect. And positive feedback, which increases the initially generally just small amplification, has a destabilizing effect. And we all know that natural and technological and social systems are full of feedback mechanisms. And maybe here.
Yeah, so, I mean, of course, we all worry with all the limited predictability we have and uncertainties that we're facing, and we don't know whether, let's say, we will improve our lifestyles or we will be doomed. So whether we are heading towards a utopia or dystopia, which most probably are extremes that will not be reached, but we will be somewhere in between. But I guess we can also say that in your work, it can be inferred that something too terrible is simply not sustainable, because then it destroys itself. So as Peter was saying, if we don't have a balanced situation between positive and negative feedbacks, then that doesn't endure. So, I mean, of course, we can say that evolution will take us to some sustainable solution, and then the question is how much suffering there will be during the process. But anyway, getting back to the books, what would you expect that the readers will take from them? What would you like their reactions or their the consequences of reading your books would be? Maybe Peter, you can start now.
First of all, as this time very difficult to make books visible. We need readers, and we strongly hope that the podcast will help to increase the visibility of the book. So one of my main goals is to emphasize the secret renaissance of cybernetics, which disappeared more or less, but I believe we need this concept, and I think that the founding fathers, as Warren McCulloch, and we all know that this whole AI boom grew up from the McCulloch-Pitts model in 1943. He doesn't get the sufficient credit what he should deserve. And Norbert Wiener, who saw everything, that how computer science should be used in from technology and biology and social systems and the human use of cybernetics. So I believe we need their market. We need their concepts. And yes,
I think to a large degree, many of the cybernetic concepts have been absorbed by general science, and you simply don't call it cybernetics. So systems, everybody speaks about systems and so on. But I think we could use many concepts from cybernetics, such as feedback, that, as you say, seem to have been forgotten, or Ashby's law of requisite variety, and many other contributions from those years that, let's say, seem to have been forgotten.
One thing what I find interesting, that during the history we had a number of stock market crashes. The first was the famous Dutch tulip bulb going back to 1634 or 5. And this is the product of an unbounded positive feedback. People wanted to be rich, so they sold their house, bought tulip bulb. There was a month when the tulip bulb price increased, I don't know, 100 times, so people more and more. And then there was a small intervention, there was a huge crash. And this is what, and the same patterns followed again and again. And we stupid people don't learn from history and make the same problems. So, and I also see that this unbounded positive feedback leads to different type of disasters, both natural and social disasters. It happens because we need that occasionally. We need some balancing force.
Yep. Nick?
Yeah, I think there's some kind of interesting things coming out here, and in terms of sort of maybe what we want sort of readers to take away, or the messages that we sort of want to send with these books. I think there's absolutely some truth in kind of what Peter's saying there about the idea of bringing back this concept of sort of control theory, if you like, cybernetics, back into the sort of public domain. But Carlos, you're absolutely right that many of those ideas have now been subsumed just into the sort of general understanding of how systems work. And I think one of the key things is that if we use simple models, interacting models like a Lotka-Volterra type predator-prey model, we can see systems that are oscillating backwards and forwards, and they become persistent. You could say that they have some longevity, but they may not be stable. So it comes down to a question of what we consider to be acceptable oscillations. We can have a system which oscillates within comfortable bounds, and our predator and prey system might just fluctuate nicely around or within certain limits. But we can also have the similar system with different parameters, which leads to unbounded growth and then sudden collapse, and then a recovery and huge growth and then collapse, which is, I guess, what Peter was alluding to there with sort of economic systems. So both systems might be considered persistent. They might keep going for a long time. But for us as people living through those systems, the experience will be quite different. If we're going through one where we're living comfortably within bounded limit cycle behavior, it'll be a lot more comfortable and easy to adjust to those changes. Whereas if we keep going from boom to bust, it's going to be quite a terrifying existence, I would say. So I guess the message to come out of this, really, if there is one, is that feedbacks are there. They control everything that we do. But we do have some agency in how they affect us. And I think understanding the coupled nature of everything that we are exposed to helps us think about how we manage those interactions. We can't change the system as such, but we can change the way the components of the system interact. So, and I think that's something that you wrote about in your paper, Carlos, your recent review paper. So that's kind of the way I would see it, that we as individuals have some agency in what we do.
Yeah. So what Nick is referring is it came out in a project we did with colleagues and students a few years ago in the Mexico City Metro, where, let's say, people used to push in order to enter and exit the trains. And it's a challenging problem because if you want to get in, you need to push. So how can you change the rules of the game when everybody's playing the same game? And it's not like, oh, we'll just change the passengers with, I don't know, more order ones from Japan or Germany or whatever. We cannot do that. But then by providing information on platforms on where the doors would stop, people started queuing and everything became much smoother and there were lots of benefits. So this is like one example of a system where you cannot change the components, but then you can regulate the interactions. And I think that's the only alternative we have for many systems. And we are still in a stage where we are developing tools in order to properly study and understand the interactions.
Yes. So I would like to go back for a minute or two for economics. However, we are not economists, and I would like to very much to know your opinion, not only Nick, but also Carlos. So I'm inclined to think that one of the most important statements in the century was, which came from Alan Greenspan, was the served as the chairman of the Fed. And he admitted, oh, I totally believe that economics is self-regulatory. And, oh, I made a mistake. And I was totally wrong. So this acknowledgement was significant because he was a loyal advocate of the free market and minimal regulations. And his concessions highlighted the need for reevaluating the regulatory framework governing financial institutions, contributed to the ongoing discussions about the role of government. And of course, it goes back, the most modern economic theories discuss the contradiction between Keynes and the free market theory of Milton Friedman. So it's an oversimplification, but at the end of the day, the question is, should we or should not we control economics? So from the perspective of feedback and cybernetics, how do you see these whole issues?
Yeah, I think that, again, if we go to the extremes of either not regulating or regulating too much, then you won't have an efficient economy because without regulation, things become too chaotic. And with too much regulation, they become too rigid and then they cannot adapt. So again, it's about how can you balance the regulation so that there's enough freedom for innovation to flourish and economies to grow, but without allowing, let's say, certain interests to take over and then hinder economic growth that you end up having with monopolies, for example.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of this comes back to the ideas that Adam Smith put forward in the 18th century, the idea that within a system where everyone is working for the common good, then the system should regulate itself to the point where everybody has enough. But of course, we know from experience that that doesn't actually transpire in the real world, because there are bad actors that deliberately want to do harm or take more for themselves. But there are also it's just innate human behavior. We have, concepts like the tragedy of the commons, where everyone just thinks, well, I'll just take a little bit more because it won't affect anybody else very much. But then, of course, everybody does it. So the cumulative impact is very large. So actually, in the real world, that sort of self-regulation doesn't really work. So we do need some kind of external constraint. But of course, I'm not an economist, so this is well outside my area of expertise. But that's the way I see it from a theoretical perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there are many studies on evolution of cooperation using game theory, and it's precisely many dilemmas occur when the best option for individuals is in conflict with the best option for the groups. And one way of solving this is basically changing the payoff matrix or changing the rules of the game so that the best option for individuals is also the best option for the group. So then you don't need to enforce laws because people benefit from choosing what's also best for the group. But of course, in many cases, we cannot come up with the right regulation or the right incentives to achieve that. And that's an open challenge. So maybe already to start closing, I guess we spoke briefly about similarities and differences of the book. So maybe we can start closing with the challenges and opportunities that you see ahead.
Carlos, I would like to go back a little for the differences, because
Sure.
I think what is interesting that we how we organize the book. So what Nick did, that was basically evolutionary perspective. So started with geological and earth issues, and then life, and then climate, and then humans, and then society. That was self. Nick, I would have incorporated to the self the human chapters. We went back and then beyond, and the synthesis. And I basically very similar, but I use in terms of scientific fields. So I started with the role of feedback in the history of technology, then in feedback control in biological systems, and obviously homeostasis, then applications from cellular to social ecological systems, then climate systems, tsunamis, wildfires, and then economics, then very important, from natural disaster to social riots. And so we organized in a different way, but many things, many overlapping ideas were in the book, but it was totally different. The organization was totally different, but I think that both were reasonable. So probably we were able to read each other's book.
Actually, I found similarities in the organization in the sense that each chapter is about a different level of organization.
Yes.
So that's a similarity. I don't know whether you would like to comment on this, Nick.
I guess my approach was one of scale, really. I'd sort of amassed all this literature on feedbacks in different systems, but the way that I tried to organize things was very much going from the largest possible scale, the scale of the Earth at the beginning, long temporal scales, large spatial scales, and then gradually refining those scales through the book. So by the time we get to chapter 6, we're into the level of neuronal avalanches in the individual brain and things like that. And then, of course, towards the end, we blow it right out into the sort of the scale of the universe. But that was kind of my thinking. So it wasn't. It comes across as being sort of disciplinarily focused, I suppose, because each chapter is about a different sort of topic. But that wasn't necessarily the the guiding thought. It was really just about scales, which, you know, I guess is something that's very pertinent to complex systems, the idea of scale invariance and fractal type relationships.
And I think also a similarity of both books is that they both illustrate our huge ability to influence our world. I mean, no species has had so much control over their environment. And then an open question is where will we lead with this ability? Will we be able to steer it through, let's say, a more desirable situation, or we will make lots of mistakes and ruin our environment? So actually, this is related to my last question about challenges and opportunities that you see ahead.
Nick?
Yeah, I can comment on that. I think one thing that's quite interesting is that both Peter and I talk a little bit about Gaia theory in different places, in different ways. But it's quite interesting. Peter has this quote, which I think comes from somebody else, describing Gaia theory as beautiful but flawed. And I think it's wonderful in a way because you know, James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis had a fantastic idea there. It's a wonderful narrative. And in terms of sort of galvanizing sort of human action and sort of individual sort of responses to a situation, these sort of poetic narratives are very, very useful. I think they give people a very simple kind of concept to sort of hang on to. But the sort of negative thing, I guess, if there is one, around the idea of the sort of Gaia hypothesis, is that it takes away some of that agency. You know, it sort of says the Earth's just fine. We have this concept of homeostasis, that everything's in balance, and it kind of leaves us on the sidelines. And we know from what's happened over the last decades, maybe century and a half even, that humans are very much influencing everything around us. We do have unintended agency as well as intentional agency. So I think by taking us away from that sort of passive role in the sort of social environmental sphere and putting us back in a place where we should be acknowledging the impacts we've had, but also acknowledging the responsibility and the agency that we have still in order to change things, to work on those components and the way that they interact, to maybe take our future evolution in a better direction, i.e. one that's more accommodating of other species and future generations. So that's kind of what I would see as the sort of hopefully the takeaway and the future outlook, that we sort of regain some of that responsibility.
So it is difficult. So I believe and cannot prove that homeostasis most likely doesn't exist on a global level. And the Gaia hypothesis is a nice hypothesis or perspective. It's not true. I had a strong debate after one of my lectures in Hungary that why I don't believe it. And then I told it is not true, that it doesn't, they are not able to deduce from non-equilibrium thermodynamics. But of course, because I like non-equilibrium thermodynamics, this is the system theoretical framework for the living world. It would be good, but just we are not able to prove. But it's a nice concept, and obviously Lovelock in his whole life, Margulis is wonderful. But the Gaia hypothesis suggests that the Earth is basically a self-regulating system, and so it remains as a question of belief. It is beyond scientific proof, at least for the time being. So I'm able to accept it. Somebody tells, I believe in Gaia hypothesis, but it is, I don't see the strict scientific proof. But of course, we know that the scientific theories only can be falsified and cannot be verified, going back to Karl Popper.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I mean, repeating what I said, there's lots of uncertainty, but I mean, I think we should be hopeful because, let's say, we have conceptual tools and we are developing more in order to understand and regulate our world. But of course, that doesn't mean that we will not have some mistakes that we can learn from on the way.
So, Carlos, and I think we should finish almost 40 minutes. This is what people are able to accept.
Yep.
And as this is an interactive, lively podcast, I hope I managed somehow to save it, but probably I will not have any other tool just to push the hard button to shut down the system with the hope that the recording has been saved. I will send you the information what happened. Then we make a second discussion what to do if not, if yes, Jacob.
No, you can at least close Zoom and then it will.
I think so. I think
Yeah.
so.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
We will keep the connection, right? Good.
Sure.
And congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye
It
bye.
was a pleasure. Have a great day.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you both.
Bye bye.
Várom, hogy tudjak beszélni veled 3 percet.
Sőt, igen.
Gáborral fel kell, hogy hívjak.